Okay, so well, thanks a lot for having me here. It's really great to be around, and thanks to Attila for inviting me and organizing the talk. Today I'm going to be presenting. I'm sorry.
You should share your screen. I forgot to do that.
I should share my screen?
Yeah.
Sure. Can share this one?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or the one screen.
It's, just need to do this.
I think you should click here.
Yeah.
You minimize this. The presentation.
This one. Okay. Oh yeah. Fine. So this is a so the project I'm presenting today is informing risky migration, evidence from a field experiment in Guinea. It's work that I have. So this is joint work with with Lucia Corno and Eliana Ferrara. And it's a paper where we look at the impact of an information intervention about irregular migration on the beliefs that potentially irregular migrants have on the outcomes relating to migration. So be it risks connected to the journey or economic outcomes abroad when they actually get to the destination countries. And we do so with an RCT in West Africa. So irregular migration has been a top policy issue in terms of political relevance in the last few years for basically all high-income countries. And this is true both from the political economic perspective and the the political relation between the destination country and migration flows. But I would say something of an overlooked policy issue is that the main the main people involved are actually the migrants. So we tend to forget a bit about this element in our political debate. And migrants going through irregular migration have been a large number by any standards in the last few years. When we started this project in 2017, in the 3 years prior, there were a little less than 500,000 people crossing the Mediterranean from Africa. So this doesn't include the figures of migrants crossing through the Balkans. So we're talking about many people involved were trying to overcome legal obstacles to migration through irregular migration, and the process itself and the decision to migrate entails large risks for the people involved. So on the one hand, you have risks that are related to the actual traveling time. So to reach Europe from West Africa, you have to go through the Sahara Desert, the Mediterranean Sea. So you have to go through important geographical barriers, but you also have the risk of being preyed upon by traffickers in countries that cannot guarantee that human rights are actually enforced, and that's the case, for example, for Libya. But the risks are not just relating to the traveling process, also they relate to what happens once you are actually reaching your destination country. So once in Europe, migrants face very bad odds in terms of employment if they're irregular, and that's usually blamed for cause on the several legal obstacles that high-income countries place on labor market participation for irregular migrants. So what's even more worrying from the economist perspective is that it's kind of hard for migrants to get reliable, clean information about what happens when you actually migrate. And this is due to several factors. So your usual way to get information if you're a potential migrant is to call your friend in France, Italy. Problem is that your friend in Italy or France may actually not want to say what is happening for a couple of reasons. One, so if things are not really going well, then your friend may suffer from stigma and may not want, other people around to know that things are not going properly after spending so much money and so much effort to migrate. And also, it's a well-documented fact among practitioners that people living through these traumatic experiences, especially going through Libya, they don't want to recount what happens. The moment they set foot on shore, they don't want to talk about this anymore. So it would be unsurprising if this, this very common information flow is broken. And there are also other complications in, for migrants who want to inform themselves on the outcomes of migration. One is that it's really complicated, for researchers to understand what's the actual pathway to regular status in many countries, Italy included. And Italy will be the main focus of this work. For me, it was a mess to understand how you get to be a regular migrant, and it's a really, it goes almost by chance in a way. So I guess it's really hard also for people who don't know the language or the institutions. And finally, there may be incentives, outright incentives for migrants to misrepresent risk and make migration look more enticing than it actually is. So all in all, what we think is that there's a potential for misperceptions that can induce then ex post suboptimal migration decisions. So what we do in this paper is we try to answer the following question: can the provision of information about traveling and economic outcomes affect beliefs about migration and migration choice itself? That's what we're going to look at in this work. And we do so with an experiment, an RCT that we run in Guinea, in West Africa. So we involve 160 high schools of the capital with about 7,000 people. We give an information intervention related to the risk of traveling and economic outcomes of migration. And then we show that this information has potential migrants assess both the assessing the outcomes of irregular migration and then affects their choice to migrate.
Just a clarification question: is this a conflict zone or is it a peaceful area? Or
no? So especially when we started the research, this wasn't politically. So this wasn't a particularly problematic area in terms of political conflict. It's worsening a bit, but by any standard, it's not a conflict area. We contribute with this work to a couple of literatures. One is a small but sprawling literature on interventions targeting the supposed lack of information by migrants. I think the closest work here is the work by Battiston and Mackenzie, where they basically look at an information intervention that is similar to ours in conjunction with other types of intervention, like job training or information about how to migrate locally. So this is kind of a new field. So our contribution in this literature is really to provide some evidence, which is still quite lacking. And then we indirectly contribute to another literature on the on works, so works eliciting migrants' expectations and comparing them to actual outcomes. This literature has historically focused on economic outcomes of migration. So here we have something about the risk of the journey and the cost of migration. So let me give you, unless you have questions, let me give you a few details about the context, and then I can actually come to the intervention that we delivered. So Guinea is an important source country for irregular migration to Europe. It ranked first as a country of origin for irregular migrants crossing the Mediterranean in 2018, with 14,000 arrivals. And alone, Guineans accounted for 8% of all the migrants rescued at sea. So the reason we know this is that for this peculiar type of irregular migration, people are actually saved and identified on disembarkation. So this is not your usual irregular migration setting, if you wish, because you have more data on it. But then it allows us to know a lot of stuff and also to deliver this information to the migrants ultimately. So that's That's pretty important for us. 8% may not seem large, but also consider in terms of the overall volume, but also consider that Guinea is not a very big country. It's 12 million inhabitant country, so it's much lower than Nigeria, obviously, but also compared to Mali or Senegal, it's a smaller one, and still it's very relevant in terms of migration. Guinea is in West Africa. It's placed here, and what I want to show you with this map is basically what's the way that you can actually get to Europe if you want to migrate irregularly from there. So basically, there are two routes. The traditional one after 2014-15 was the Central Mediterranean route, which meant that which required migrants to get to basically Libya through Mali and Niger, and then cross from Libya to Italy. That was the Central Mediterranean route of migration, and it was active, very active until 2017. Then things moved a bit towards the Western Mediterranean route of migration, which connects Morocco and Spain, basically. Now, this is kind of interesting for us because these routes tend to have a little bit different characteristics. So we did something about that we elicited beliefs separately for these routes. And in theory, what we see is that based on IOM surveys, so people who are actually interviewed in Spain and Italy, irregular migrants were interviewed by the International Organization of Migration. We see that there is a difference in terms of risk. Okay, so for example, in the Central Mediterranean route, 80% of male and 66% of female report being victim of violence. So those who are interviewed in Italy, this is obviously very high. If you ask the same question in Spain, so for people going through the Western Mediterranean route, the percentages go down to 49 and 40%. Yeah.
What is in general the gender distribution of migrants? Like most of these people are young men, right?
Yeah. So those who actually go through this step tend to overwhelmingly be male. Okay. So yeah.
Verification question. What's a trafficking reporting? So everyone gets trafficked now. So what do you mean by that? Yeah.
Here it mostly means a couple of things. One is working without receiving any money in return, and the other is being kidnapped for ransom. Yeah, but this is kind of common. I mean, it can go from the light kidnapping to very bad episodes with torture. But if you are working in Guinea, I heard many of these stories, secondhand, obviously. So I wasn't surprised to see the reports at all. And also for trafficking, then we see this kind of difference, this gap between the two routes, with the Central Mediterranean route, which tends to be the most dangerous one still. Even for the other, we're not talking about the free lunch here. Okay, so both of them are extremely dangerous. The Central Mediterranean route tend to be much more.
And these are only the people who get caught, no?
No, precisely because this is a very peculiar context of irregular migration. There's no difference between being caught and making it to the other side. So,
how come?
Because you have to be caught in order not to draw at sea, basically, especially in the Central Mediterranean. Now, for Spain, things are a little bit more nuanced because you can actually get to the shores of Spain without being intercepted. But for Italy, and especially during this period, this is like we're talking about a very, very, very minor fraction.
Okay.
So, yeah. So usually these people are interviewed at stations or centers, like reception centers, informal reception centers. The other important piece of information that these surveys give us is that irregular migration tend to be overwhelmingly young and educated. So 55% of people who migrate irregularly and are found by the IOM naturally report having secondary education or both, which sort of backs our approach of focusing on high schools. of Conakry. So let me be a bit more specific about what we do now. We have 160, we select randomly 160 high schools out of the 300 at Conakry, and we split them in 4 equally sized groups. One acts as a pure control, receiving no information at all, and the other 3 are 3 different treatment arms. The first, so treatment 1, only receives risk information. Treatment 2 only receives, treatment 1 only receives risk information about the journey. Treatment 2 only receives information about the economic outcomes of migration, and treatment 3 bundles together the 2 types of information. This intervention was designed together by us with 2 NGOs. One was an Italian one, Un Sole per Tutti. This is an NGO from the north of Italy, working in reception centers, and basically what they did was to collect video testimonies of migrants who were in the reception center. And IGD is the other NGO with which we worked, is a Guinean NGO working in education in the capital, Conakry. And what we did with them was to draft the final version of the intervention that we will actually deliver in class, based on the local knowledge of the context, obviously, and ask them to actually carry out all the data collection and the intervention in class. So just to be clear, everyone who went to class, be it for data collection, be it for delivery intervention, is Guinean, if not from Conakry. So this helps us also in terms of trust, and already poses a bit of a caveat if you want to scale up this intervention.
Sorry for a blunt question, but is this ethical in the end, that you're basically manipulating these kids by giving them selective information?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a question that you will ask about any information intervention, right?
Sure.
Okay, so I will refer to that literature then. Yeah, I guess, right. I mean, if there are reasons to think that the information flows are broken, and
Yeah, but you're not giving them full information. I mean, it's fine. So to give full and unbiased information, sure. That,
yeah, but what is full information in this context? I mean, if you want to give full information, you will probably have to break.
no, I mean, you're doing more than that. You're basically giving very lopsided information. At least according to the slide, you're giving the lopsided.
Let me come to that point. So we use both video testimonies with migrants who actually made it. We didn't ask them what they wanted to say, so they spoke on camera, and then we cut it up and sent it. And the other part were smart graphs. But you know, actually, let me come to that. So the video testimonies, sorry, I come to that second. The video testimonies are probably pessimistic, but if not, because migrants who were interviewed about their experience, and I'm talking about migrants who made it, were extremely pessimistic. So, you know, to preserve honesty, we didn't change any of that. The unethical thing would have been to change that information in order to give, you know, a pessimistic and an optimistic view, because that wasn't there. But the other part we did, and that's real information, is showing smart graphs. And smart graphs are probabilities. So this is, for example, showing the probability of violence. That was an integral part of the treatment. And it's taken from official statistics. Now, there were people who were surprised positively by these smart graphs. We see it in the data. So there's actually some people who made an update upwards. Obviously, we see that on average people were over optimistic and that they updated downwards, but that's more or less the point of the thing, right? If there's no misinformation, then this thing at best is not useful. Yeah.
So I might have missed this, but what is the success rate? Like 100% will make it to the target country where they want to go?
It's very hard to say because migration is not a one-shot decision, and then I mean we so you for a bunch of people like 40%, they are actually migrating for the second time. So these may be people who go to Libya or Morocco, even better in this moment, stay there for a while and see if a chance comes up to go to the side. So we don't have that figure. I guess it's very hard to define.
Does the control group receive any kind of information, or do you?
No. We decided not to give any information to the control group. There are two risks with this strategy. One is bundling together people in the treatment group as an effect of its own, and we don't want that to pollute our treatment effects. But actually, the same surveys work in a similar way, in the sense that we brought the same people in the same class, and if they had a chance to meet around the survey, they would probably also meet around the treatment, and the other way around. Plus, we are really talking about, India not so big a group, like 50 people, compared to classes that can be around 35, 40 students. So we are not really talking about forming really big groups. And the other part, the other risk is to prime them to think about migration, which the survey does itself.
Yeah.
So the survey makes you think a lot about migration and the risks connected to it, and the potential outcomes and the benefits that you can get from it. So you're really primed to think a lot about it in the survey itself. So we think this balances a bit this risk. Still, it's not perfect. We close so this is all for the information about risk outcomes. We focus on travel conditions, so exploitation, violence, and journey length. So yeah.
Sorry, so maybe this is a stupid question, but what is the alternative? The alternative is to stay in the country, or is there a possibility to migrate regularly? Like, is that like a legally feasible way to do that if someone wants to leave the country?
So there are a couple of ways to migrate regularly. One is to go through family reunification, but it takes a long time. Many people here I show have contacts abroad, and some of them are family in France or Italy. So you can actually get there with the family reunification, but honestly, it takes a lot of time because you have to prepare a lot of documents, you have to have a lot of guarantees, etc. The other way is to go studying, and then we see, we see some differences in impact based on the income, which also contribute to the fact that some people can actually go, others cannot go. Finally, another alternative is to migrate elsewhere, which is something that happens a lot in Africa. So people move around regionally. They go to Senegal, they go to Cote d'Ivoire, etc. So we see a little bit of that.
One question about the design. Did you have any element trying to prevent information spillover? Because I suppose if you selected the schools randomly, it can happen that they're in the same neighborhood, that it's made in the square before. Or do you have any exposed evidence that shows that the control group was not contaminated?
No, so we do have some, so we try to keep schools apart in the sense of not picking schools in the same building, because this happens that schools share buildings. We did this, but more than this we couldn't, because the city is very dense. We picked a lot of schools, so it wasn't really feasible to keep schools 2 kilometers apart. It's not feasible here. So there are for sure spillovers. I'm sure. We also have we document that people were speaking to people of other schools. So everything that I show today is a lower bound. Let's put it this like this. It's easier to. Okay, so the information about risk is entirely specular to the information about economic outcomes. We still have video testimonies which are meant to sort of give an idea of what the mechanisms are, what we talk about when we talk about irregular state use or difficulty to find jobs. And then we show probabilities lines. Again, here some people are positively surprised, some people are negatively surprised. So this is not unidirectional. There's and here, sorry, the probabilities refer to employment, studies, continuing studies, and getting asylum. And they're taken from the Eurostat and the European Labour Force. We then give a flyer with 6 vignettes here, sort of closing the intervention and summing up what we say. in terms of the timeline, so this experiment lasted 1 year and a half, more or less. We started with a baseline survey in November 2018. We then started rolling out the treatment. So the baseline survey, collected both migration intentions and beliefs. And by beliefs here, I mean probability of good economic outcomes and bad bad journey outcomes. So these are the beliefs I'm talking about. Probability that a given event happens. And then, so this survey so these beliefs were listed with an in-person tablet survey, self-administered, with enumerators from the local NGO, checking that people didn't have any question that came up on how to use the tablets and the application that we're giving and the questions. Then we rolled out the treatment from February 19 to April 2019. And while we were rolling out the treatment, we started rolling out the first follow-up, which was entirely similar to the baseline. So we have like 1 month apart, we have the treatment and the follow-up, and then we can start to see the effect on beliefs. And then after 1 year, in January 2020, we started asking about migration decisions. Now, this survey was different. So in this survey, we combined the in-school, in-person, self-administered tablet survey, which we had in the baseline, the first follow-up, with phone calls. And this made all the difference. So we asked during the baseline for phone numbers of people, of close contacts, so students. And then we used this close contacts. We actually asked them in advance, we said, if we're not gonna reach you, can we call these guys to ask information about where you are? And then we did this. And most of the time it was them. So they weren't in school, but we could actually join them on the phone. For a few cases, we also have directly contacted contacts, and so we could decrease the additional rates. This was really important because just after 1 month, so 1 month after the treatment, we could find 61% of students. So this is due to people being absent in school. That's what was happening. Nobody was refusing here to participate, just they weren't there. So if we were, and this is a bit of a problem for our beliefs results, luckily they are so strong that probably, this is not too big an issue. But for the migration results, this would have been a huge problem because migration is a really rare outcome. So by using phone calls, we reduced this attrition to 0.04% in the case of migration, which then made our data usable to test the impact of the intervention. So everything is balanced here. I won't dwell too much on this table. Let me just say a couple of things. There's a lot of willingness to migrate in the sample that we studied. So 30% of people say they would wish to migrate if there was a chance. 19% say they plan to migrate in the next 12 months, and 5% say they made a preparation. These are for sure extreme exaggerations of the actual decisions to migrate. So people, overstate a lot, but they give us a dimension of the sort of a measure of the interest that there is in this issue. And that's something that we that actually squares with other characteristics of the students that we see. So 38% of people as a classmate who has migrated abroad, 60% as at least one contact abroad, and 41% says at the baseline that they have discussed migration with friends or siblings in the last week. So that's a really huge figure. If I think about how much I was thinking about migration when I was in high school, and this is just in a 1 week span. So pretty much everyone knows about the routes that I told you about, the Spanish one and the Italian one. So people know about what we are talking about in terms of know the phenomenon, know that the irregular migration phenomenon is there, and they can actually migrate everything. Now,
Sorry, can you?
sure.
The last part of the table.
Yeah.
So which one is true for each piece of information?
Yeah. So sorry, I didn't go on this, but it's actually interesting. We have some questions about so some true or false questions with a don't know option also. With statements that we could actually check whether they were true or not. They mostly focus on Italy because we then gave video testimonies on Italy, but they're still useful. So we asked them whether asylum seekers could work in Italy. This is true, but 44% of people thought it was false. We told them, we asked them whether poverty gives the right to asylum in Italy. That's false. 34% thought it was true. We asked whether Italy had jus soli, so the right of citizenship by birth, and 67% thought it was true, but it's false.
Oh, it's false.
Yeah. Well, so other things are a bit better, like asylum seekers being deported to the country of first arrivals. People generally know about this, and this is unsurprising because many of them want to go to France. So this is not their country of first arrival. So, and then it's false that Guineans can obtain Italian citizenship by marrying an Italian. So they know that they can. They know they can obtain citizenship if they marry irregular migrants. So the empirical strategy is actually pretty easy because it's an RCT, but I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. First, we include some controls in our analysis, but they don't really matter at all. These are the stratification dummy. We have an above median. We stratified on the school being above median in terms of the number of students. Then we have individual controls and school controls. These don't matter, but we include them in regressions to show this. Then we include a lag outcome for the beliefs. And the reason why we do this is that we have a lot of attrition in the first follow-up, and we want to at least tame a bit the issue. Finally, the other thing I want to point your attention to is that we are testing a lot of hypotheses. We'll see that in a minute when it comes to beliefs. So we need to take this into account when we make inference. And we do it in two ways. One is we compute family-wise error rates, which are a measure of, so you can basically recompute the values, taking into account that you're testing many hypotheses and that these hypotheses tend to be correlated. And then we compute also PCA aggregates and other aggregates just for robustness, but that's another way to take into account any hypothesis, just bundle things together. Let me start with the impact of the treatment on beliefs about risk conditions in its PCA aggregate. So the risk, so here I'm showing as bar plots the effect of the treatment. The scale here is standard deviations of the PCA aggregate. So the risk treatment, the econ treatment, and the double treatment increase risk perceptions. Now, two things are interesting here. The magnitude is kind of big, so we're talking about almost a standard deviation, so 0.7 to 0.8 is in the case of risk and double treatment, and instead half of that, so 0.4 something for econ. The other thing that is important to note here is that the econ treatment doesn't include any risk information. So it seems like, so we see that people talk after the intervention. We imagine that they started also to talk about the issue more, and this can, on the one hand, produce some spillover, but at least produce some individual information search that can actually lead to being more pessimistic. Okay. The reassuring thing in a way is that what contains a risk information, so the risk treatment and the double treatment have a larger impact, and this you can test for this actually, and it's true, compared to the econ treatment. Now, if you break up this PCA aggregate into the different elements, different probabilities, you see a similar pattern. So here I'm showing the probability of violence, being forced to work, being kidnapped, death during the journey, and being sent back upon arrival. You kind of see the same pattern where you have the risk treatment and double treatment being more, so making people more pessimistic, but the econ treatment also does. And again, a way we can rationalize this is again to think about individual information search. And the here the treatment effects are represented in percentage points. So a lot of these tend to be quite large. So we're talking about effects between the 5 percentage points and 11 percentage points, compared to averages of 40, 50%. Percentage points of previous assessment. All of this is robust family-wise error rates. Okay. Now, for the econ treatment, you kind of see a similar pattern. So the risk, so all of the treatments seem to have an effect, but in this case, it's interesting to see that only the double treatment has a much larger effect than both the risk and econ. So we see a larger significance of a larger magnitude of these effects, which is also statistically significant. And now the decrease in economic expectations here, a negative sign here is people being made more pessimistic, is between 0.3 and 0.65 standard deviations. Again, you see a similar pattern when you turn to the probability of given events. So this is employment, probability of continuing studies, obtaining asylum, becoming a citizen of the host country, returning after rather than before 5 years, receiving public transfers, and the host country attitudes, which are basically, here we were asking, out of 100 people in Italy or whatever country you've chosen to go to hypothetically, what's the percentage of people who are in favor of migrants or in favor of migration? And probably we actually asked this question in reverse, like what hostile to migration, and we took 100 minus that number to make everything coherent here. Now, here you see a color coding. The blue bars are the coefficients that are robust family-wise error rates. So on average, I would say the econ and the double treatment tend to have the most robust, statistically more robust effect, which again is kind of not surprising. And the effects again are in the order of 3 to 10 percentage points, comparing to averages that are a little bit lower than before, so about 30% for these outcomes. So now these beliefs impact translate into an impact on the willingness to migrate. So we see a decrease in people reporting wishing to migrate if they had a chance, and also for people planning, but not for people preparing. They are sizable, and especially for planning, it seems to be a bit more concrete than wishing. They are concentrated on the risk and the double treatment. So it seems like risk information is something that interests more students.
What is the scale here?
Percentage points.
Okay.
Yeah. Percentage points. So the average of baseline here was 30%, 20%, 19%, and 5%. Yeah. So the magnitude is pretty big.
Aren't you worried that that people think that they are expected to say that they are not willing to migrate?
Yeah. I am. I think this is potentially an issue. That's absolutely. And in fact, so one thing that is a bit reassuring is that we don't ask this right away. Okay, so we are, this is us 1 month after the intervention. So if I were to ask you, I show you that migrating is dangerous, and then I ask you, do you want to migrate, then I would probably, have that problem even more. We try to do some, heterogeneity on social desirability by seeing whether effects are heterogeneous in groups, between people talking about migration before or not. Because we were thinking maybe in groups where people talk about migration, it's more acceptable to migrate, and then the social desirability should bite less. And then we have some evidence that this doesn't really happen. So that's the only thing that we would do. If anything else comes to mind, I'm happy to discuss. Maybe there's a better way to go after this. Yeah.
If I interpret this graph correctly, then I think it implies that thanks to the treatment, there are more such people who don't plan to migrate, but they are still preparing to migrate. I mean, how can you prepare to migrate if you don't plan?
Yeah. So I guess all of these are obviously like, things that people say they will do. So, the relation between how you react to this also depends on your willingness to believe in yourself actually migrating after you say it. So it should be taken with a grain of salt. It's not like if they say they're preparing to migrate, they will actually migrate. And so this is not like actual decisions. What may explain a bit this result is that the fraction saying they are preparing to migrate in the first place is actually much smaller. So people preparing to migrate are a fourth of people planning to. So it's also kind of.
Is there any chance to go back to these people now and check whether they actually migrated?
Oh, that's what I'm doing once.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Here you are. So we go back to these guys hereafter. Actually, more than these guys, we use the phone to contact all the people that even the ones that we couldn't find in the first follow-up, and then we test whether the treatments have any impact in their decisions to migrate. Here, migrating is being outside Guinea for at least 1 month at the time of the interview. Now, in the first, you see there are 6 columns. The first 3 are the treatment on the treated, the last 3 are the ID estimates, because we actually have attendance data, so we can compute the ID. We include gradually the individual controls and school controls in the regressions for each triplet of columns. In the first panel, we bundle together all the treatments, and then we just test whether the putting the treatments together was an effect. We find a negative and no significant effect for everyone. In the second panel, panel B, we split the treatments into the different types, and we see that there is a negative and significant impact on migration only of the risk treatment. So this is in percentage points, and it's more or less half of the migration rate in the sample. The migration rate in the sample in the control group was 1.6% after 1 year. Now, this may seem not huge, but this is 1 year in high school. So compared to like Italy or France, these are very big numbers. Sure.
Isn't it clear that there is an effect for the risk treatment, but not for the trouble?
Yeah. That's very clear. That's exactly where it hurts. Now we are working a bit on this. And I haven't the tables out yet here, but what we are looking at is, so we're trying to conduct some heterogeneity in terms of people having contacts abroad. And we see that when you split the sample on people having contacts abroad or not, this changes a bit. So I probably think that there's some polluting effects of having contacts or not. Not exactly clear why.
But if you randomize on the school level, then
I
this
know.
should not matter.
I know, but when we're working with so very rare events, even small deviations may actually matter. So,
Isn't it possible that after a while, additional negative information in fact just erase the first negative information. So I just so bad I won't believe it. Like you've been talking to me for 30 minutes about migration. So
it's actually, so this is actually a possibility. And I think it's actually interesting because it's a matter of trust in the end. If they don't trust what you say, obviously no one is gonna react.
But then you would need to see this on the leaves as well.
There you
We
go.
don't see this on the
There you
leaves.
Okay, yeah. There you go. Exactly. It's exactly what I mean in mind. That was kind of the first thing we thought, but then
One thing about 39% you didn't find in the first row, so maybe they have already migrated by then.
well, this shouldn't be a problem because everyone is here in a sense. 0.04% are missing here, but all the rest.
You found large effects for those who you found. So maybe if you still do something, maybe for them, maybe energy.
Well, that's something that is potentially possible, but there we were talking about 40% attrition rate. I mean, here we're talking about 1.6% of was migrated. So I don't know, like maybe for that, so it would be very hard to test for this in a way.
Is it possible that people perceive these different treatments differently? So when you only show them the risks of travel there, you manage to risk and when you show them multiple information chunks about migration, they think about it as a bunch of information about migration and they're not as scared to migrate, right? I'm not sure something about it.
So it's not about being scared anyway. So this is information. So again, some people were positively surprised by what we said. On average, it was not the case, but this happened. It may be true that when you bundle together the information, those who are surprised negatively are also the ones that are surprised positively by the other type of information. So we actually tested for this. So you can basically test for this by summing up in some way the PCA aggregate, for example, and see whether there's an impact on the aggregate. So like the sum of the PCA for econ and for risk beliefs, but we don't see much in there. And there's no, like the correlation, if anything, goes in the opposite direction.
Okay, so what is the actual outcome here? Because you say outside Guinea, but
Yeah.
are they in Europe or maybe
No,
some of them are in another?
they can
country?
be in Africa. So migration here takes a long time. So
Yeah,
we
okay, so
couldn't-
maybe they are on the way.
but then they may be on the way. They may also stop in another country. Again, there's this issue of people like.
So maybe that could be behind this difference, maybe those people. No, it's not. Okay, no, that's not.
Sorry if I missed it, but can you somehow include that into the estimation, the level of the knowledge before the treatment?
You mean
As you added some information, but.
as a control or as a?
Yeah, somehow, yeah.
Well, yeah, as a control, we tried, it doesn't matter because it's balanced, but as an heterogeneity analysis it says something. So it seems like this is not super robust. The effect of the risk seems to be higher for those who are optimistic in the first place. So, but it's still concentrated there.
I think the easiest possible explanation is that so the risk always has a weak but significant negative effect, but the economic information actually increases. So it's actually just people tend to have and they underestimate the risks, but they also underestimate the economic outcomes. So just cancel each other out.
Yeah, so something that may be going on here, and that's something that we're trying to explore, is that people are actually, they may change their mind and migrate locally, for example, when they know that things in Europe are not going well in any way. They will not even wait for the chance to migrate. They're just migrate locally. That's entirely possible, and we have some preliminary evidence that goes in that direction. So you may have that these positive but not significant number is not migration to Europe, it's migration somewhere else, and that pollutes a bit the results of the double treatment. And we're working on that. We have some preliminary results. I don't have them here. But yeah, that's entirely in line with what you were saying. So we, am I right that I finish at 10 past?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are not obviously interested in as a policy objective in reducing migration to cool, but obviously we are interested in reducing irregular risky migration. So we do some stuff to show that the effect is driven by this type of migration rather than migration per se. And then what we do is basically we show that migration. So we first define a variable that is migrating with visa and migrating without visa. This is all self-stated. So we are asking people whether they have a visa for the country they are in or the country of their final destination in case they're not stopping there. And basically we show that the effect that you saw above is entirely driven by migration without a visa. So it's not an half split, but almost. So 60%, say they 0.67% are the people in the sample who migrated saying they don't have a visa, and 0.45 are the people who migrated with a visa. This is for sure regular migration. Okay, then in here we bundle together irregular and regular because there are many countries where you don't need a visa to go. In the ECOWAS, for example, people from Guinea don't need to circulate with a visa. But still, if we were to find an effect here, we would be worried. And then we do another thing that is basically to interact our treatment with indicators for socioeconomic status. And the idea here is that if you have the financial means, it's easier to either migrate regularly or if you migrate irregularly to do so in a safer way. There's a large evidence of a very big gradient of risk depending on your wealth. For example, in Libyan shores, rich migrants get the life jackets, poor migrants are placed in the deck of the ships. There's a lot, like ton of anecdotal accounts of this happening. So you can think of many ways that the socioeconomic status can impact your migration experience. And what we see is that, so we do so by interacting our treatment with a socioeconomic status made by the durables index, which is entirely similar to what you will do with a DHS survey items, for whoever has experience with this. And in other ways, we ask people whether they have a bank account, their household has a bank account. So that's another way to get to financial, so whether people are financially constrained or not. And we see that there is a negative interaction of basically all the interactions when you interact with people being poorer. And this is significant in the case of the socioeconomic status being measured by the durable index for the risk and the equal treatment, especially the risk is bigger. And for all of this, you see basically a significant impact of the treatment only among the poor. That's what I show here in this when I'm testing the sum of the coefficients on the interaction and the base.
So what is the share of low and high SES people in the sample?
The ICS.
The share of low SES in the
Oh,
sample,
well,
so like half or what is it?
Yeah, it's basically here we use the average. Doesn't change if you change the median, but it's basically
Okay, so
it's not the norm. It's not super symmetric around the median, but well, I guess it's like 50. For bank account, I don't know all the stuff in my head. I should know. Now, to conclude, what we do is we conduct an RCT to evaluate the impact of migration of an information intervention about the risks of irregular migration and the economic outcomes of irregular migration. So we show that 1 month after the treatment, students revise risk expectation upwards and economic prospects downwards. So this is evidence that the information that we gave was perceived as a negative surprise on average. And we find that evidence of spillovers of the eco information on these perceptions. 1 year after the treatment, we see that students receiving only the journey risk information are less likely to migrate, and the effect seems to be driven by poor students and people are traveling without a visa. while the double treatment, as you were pointing out, mixing risk and economic information doesn't affect migration, while it does affect the risk. So in terms of policy implications, and I want to conclude here. So again, the objective of intervention is not to reduce migration pool. It's to reduce, it's to attain better information about potential migrants and improve their expectations, make them more in line with reality, both in terms of what happens once they get Europe and also in terms of what happens while they are traveling. And in this sense, we view our intervention as an effective policy instrument for decreasing ex post suboptimal migration decisions rather than migration. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Yeah, time for a couple of questions. Well, I have one, which has been with me for a couple of minutes now. So, so you said that a lot of migrants, a big percentage of migrants, are coming from Guinea. I was wondering what's the major push factor. I understand the push factors, I guess, but why Guinea? It's a pretty big picture question.
But for one, there is a very large income difference, for sure. And also like basic services are missing. We're talking about a very poor country by any standard. In terms of infrastructure, it's really poor country. So I guess the main drivers could be economic, I guess, although it's kind of a hard question to answer. I mean, it's not complete. But I do have a slide, which is, sorry, I don't know why it took me so much time to get it. So we asked people who wanted to migrate, why? And then what you see is that basically people say they want to continue studies or migrating for economic reasons. Now, this continuing studies may be because they deem universities there not to be good enough, for example, but it may also be that that's a way also to tell you it's economic migration. So they want to they want to get to the other side. And only 3.6% say they flee conflict, 2.7% flee persecution. But with solo numbers and self-stated stuff, it's very hard to make inference about what this means.
Maybe one more, please.
Do you see any evidence of any kind of self-serving bias? What I mean is that in some law and economics literature, when people test in surveys the people's knowledge of the relevant law, let's say relevant family law, what you see is that they know the statistical average of certain outcome, let's say divorce. But when you ask what is your probability of divorcing, they say 0%. So I was wondering, obviously I didn't see the full questionnaire that you administered to these people, whether you see any evidence of that they understood the information that you provided to them, but they have this self-serving bias that they think that somehow their outcome will be better.
Yeah, no, this is a super interesting question. I wish I had an answer, but no, it's not it, because so we in this literature listing expectations about economic outcomes of migration, but also education. There's always a trade-off between asking information for you and asking information about the average. The average can be actually can be benchmarked to what happens in the real world, and then we can know easily whether people are right or not. But with the individual knowledge, it's more interesting because it relates to your own decisions. And then if we had both, we could do something in line with what you said. What we did was to go more towards the individual decision perspective. So we asked them. So all the questions, all the beliefs refer to people. So we didn't ask the probability. We asked out of 100 people doing this, how many will cancel this event, and we characterize people as being exactly like you. So there was a way of at one time delivering like you talking to the same characteristics that the individual has, and then having some relevant stuff, but also not talking about you, which will, create even more problems in terms of social desirability, or as you said, this type of bias that I don't know that not, by the way, but I will ask you some reference.
Thank you.
Thank you.